MLS now included in the America 250 celebration plans. After a year, we still don't know who will play in USL's first division planned, and we learn more about the sale of Sporting Kansas City. That and more on Monday's edition of Morning Kickaround. Hello and welcome to the show. You found your way to Morning Kickaround, the show where we dot the map of the ever-changing American soccer landscape. My name, Robert Kerr, local soccer guy, and to my side, as always, Jason Davis, the radio soccer guy. Thank you all for joining us on this brisk Monday morning. How you feeling, Mr. Davis?
I don't think it's brisk everywhere. Shout out to Nate, who says he's in San Diego and it's 70 degrees. Why don't you brag more, Nate? Why don't you make us feel worse about being in cold places? Yeah, there's a bunch of snow on the ground where I'm at in Northern Virginia. I know that it's frigid and snowy in Michigan and other parts of the country. If you are in a cold place, be warm, be safe. It's a snow day too, so kids are running around and it's all kinds of chaos, Rob. It's chaos.
Yeah, I would say I'm calling my kids part-timers now because they just never go to school. I think they've been to school about 4 times since the holidays. They're taking it easy.
If this was the olden days, they'd have to trudge through the snow to get to the one-room schoolhouse so the school marm could wrap them on the knuckles with some rulers. That's what would be going down. That's what we need to get back. No, I'm just kidding. We don't need that at all.
And they would be doing all that while sharing one pair of shoes.
That's right. They would pass the shoes around. Yeah. That's the kind of day we're having. But I know we've got some soccer stuff, so I'm excited. Thanks to all the best, all the ultras, all the friends of the show that have stepped up to support us. I got Jeff in here. He's giving us a good morning. Our friend, Mr. Bob. We're going to get to Mr. Bob more here in a second. Shout out Mr. Bob. I already mentioned Nate. He's warm and toasty in San Diego. Who else we got? A homeless shoe. My work tried to claim I need to come in. I have the flu and I'm snowed in. Yeah, don't go in. If you have the flu, definitely don't go in. The snowed in part, maybe, whatever. All right, there we go. That's a good start to our Monday here, Rob.
All right, before we get going, I'll remind you, you can subscribe at any time as we're going along in the show. Consider becoming a member. Just $3 a month gets you access to the Morning Kickaround Discord server, access to extra and early released content, as well as priority comments on the screen during these live shows. So please consider doing so. It doesn't cost you a darn thing to recommend the show to your friends, families, and footballing acquaintances. You can also support fundraising goals on Morning Kickaround's Ko-Fi page. It's ko-fi.com/Morning Kickaround. We are also a podcast, so look for Morning Kickaround on your favorite podcast platform.
Yes,
and also
yes. We always forget to push the podcast. We had a friend of the show, a guy we're working with on some projects, say, I don't watch the show. I listen to the podcast. So shout out to Chris and everybody else listening on the podcast.
We get so caught up in YouTube, we just push the YouTube stuff, but yes, podcast as well. And then on the social medias at MKickaround across all the various platforms, X, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all of those. And then you can also write us a note, as some have been kindly doing, morningkickaround@gmail.com. Notes, messages, and business inquiries, please send them to morningkickaround@gmail.com. All right, is it time to bring up our spotlight supporter?
Yes, Rob. Yes, do that.
Yes, Mr. Bob has been a great contributor. He's been sending in super thanks, I think, almost every show for the last few weeks. So our spotlight supporter, he's going to be his name on screen here, Mr. Bob out in Albuquerque. Thank you so much for being so supportive. And he has requested in honor of those lost to recent terrible events, he's asked for 10 seconds of silence. So we'll do so in honor of those lost before we get into today's content. So we'll start the timer here and then get on with the show. All right, thank you once again, Bob, and let's get to it. Monday's edition of Morning Kickaround right here. Welcome on in, Morning Kick Around. I'm Robert. He's Jason. Tuesday morning, there will be an event in the Oval Office, including the commissioners of all the major sports commissioners in the United States as part of the quarter century celebration of the United States of America. At first, Major League Soccer Commissioner Don Garber not included in the press release, but with your astute eyes, Jason, you noticed Major League Soccer now included in Tuesday's event.
Yeah, this was interesting to me because this happened last week, that this announcement, this story. So you can see the left and the right. The left is what I shared on Blue Sky. Follow me if you like, because the original headline said the commissioners of NFL, NBA, NHL, and MLB to meet with Trump over America 250 plans. And it named each one of those commissioners. So Roger Goodell of the NFL, Adam Silver of the NBA, Gary Bettman of the NHL, and Rob Manfred of Major League Baseball. Name checked all four of them, said it was the four major sports would be represented in this meeting with the president this week, the week we're in right now. I believe this is set for tomorrow, actually. And I was like, oh, a penny for Don Garber's thoughts, because clearly MLS is not rating among the major sports leagues as viewed by this current administration. And I thought, hey, we're going to talk about this on the show at some point, the fact that MLS isn't in that conversation. And I'm not at a place in my soccer career where I'm going to rant and rave about MLS not being included. How dare they not include Major League Soccer, Rob? Of course, soccer is a major sport. This is unfair to soccer. What do they don't understand the game? You know, that's a place American soccer fans can get to pretty easily. That place of being offended that nobody appreciates our sport. Yeah, I do think obviously the place of Major League Soccer in the sports world and in soccer in general is different than any of those other sports, because as we talk about all the time, the NFL, the best football league in the world, really the only football league in the world that matters. The NBA, the best basketball league in the world. The NHL, the best hockey league in the world. Major League Baseball, the best baseball league in the world. MLS is not the best soccer league in the world. And it's not even really, depending on how you look at the metrics, the most popular soccer league in America. There are other soccer leagues that draw more attention than Major League Soccer does on a regular basis. But then I went to look at it today. I was like, oh, I remember this thing I wanted to talk about on the show. Let me pull it up. And it's changed, Rob. Over the Athletic, it changed. Commissioners of NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, and MLS to meet with Trump over America 250 plans. And I'm thinking, what happened? Like, my mind is turning. Rob, what do you think happened? Do you think MLS lobbied the White House to get Don Garber an invite? Or do we think that somebody at the White House was like, oh, wait a second, we forgot about soccer. Let's get Don Garber in as well. And by the way, Dana White also involved, because Donald Trump and Dana White are best buds, and we're supposed to be doing some UFC event for Trump's birthday, which, don't get me started on that. But Rob, what do you think?
I wonder if they were having their weekly 2026 World Cup task force call, and they were like,
Giuliani.
Yeah, there is a World Cup 2026 World Cup task force, in case anyone forgot about that. Maybe they're on that call and they were talking about this Tuesday quarter century celebration. They were like, oh yeah, we are involved in soccer. Yeah, call up that Garber guy, get him on the phone. Maybe he's free on Tuesday to be introduced and included on this.
Maybe it was Barron Trump, former DC United Academy player, who was like, hey, Dad, you didn't include soccer. He's like 20-something. He probably doesn't sound like that. But do you need to include soccer, Dad? I played soccer. Where's soccer? Maybe that happened. My sense, though, and this is just a guess, pure speculation, my sense is that probably somebody at MLS called up the White House. Somebody who has remember that there are people that Trump certainly likes, NFL owners involved in Major League Soccer, who might have had some sway with the White House over this, right? The Crafts, the Hunts, these kind of families, the Anchotzes, the Cronkies, these are all people who probably have some sort of line into the White House, who could have called up and said, hey, what about our other stuff? What about Major League Soccer? What about that?
Yeah, and I'm curious what all the major sports leagues could do to contribute to this quarter century celebration? I mean, are they going to just be putting like hashtags on the side of the fields and paint? Or what are they getting caught up in here is my question. Like, how deep is this going to
Good
go?
question.
They're going to have to, I know the article on screen references also the Hunger Games sort of parallel thing where a boy and a girl from every state will represent their state in a high school event. I'm curious, will they enter in like one NFL star versus
Can we
one
stop? Can we
star?
stop for a second and just acknowledge what you said? Because I did want to get that detail in as well, that there is a plan for some sort of like athletic competition where every state's represented and it's a boy and a girl. And yes, somebody definitely watched the Hunger Games and thought, what can we do around that idea? What can we do? What is
How
going
can we
on?
translate this tyranny in a relatable way?
Yeah, I guess I guess that's what's going on. By the way, Barry
So,
Trump is 19 years old. Somebody is saying that he has been in multiple academies. So maybe that's true, but I definitely know he was in the DC United Academy at some point. So anyway,
are we in the territory where one of the academy teammates gives him a rough tackle and then he's nervous in the locker room afterwards? Are you getting to that point? Like,
well, he's not play. I don't think Barron's playing anymore, so it's not really that's not really an issue anymore. But I don't know. Yeah, there is definitely that fear. Let's just talk about again, do we think this means anything significant for Major League Soccer that they're included, that Don Garber is now included, like originally not? Like, is this one of those situations when, oh, you forgot to invite me and now you're inviting me? Well, I don't even want to go to your stupid party. Or is Don Garber like, yep, absolutely. This is very important for MLS. We got to be involved in whatever Trump is planning for America 250.
it would be curious to know which direction the communication went, but something that popped into mind was one of the people in Trump's circle might have seen that article from The Economist saying that soccer is now the third most popular sport in the United States, surpassing Major League Baseball. So maybe, he likes, popular things. So he's like, get the soccer guy on the line. We got to get
Well,
him
look,
in the meeting. They're more popular than baseball.
we know that maybe, but also maybe Johnny Infantino, maybe
Gave
he
him a
put a
nudge.
bug in Trump's ear because obviously, I mean, I don't know that Infantino cares all that much about MLS, but he certainly cares about soccer in America to benefit FIFA. And you got the World Cup coming, and the World Cup will be happening around that 4th of July America 250 celebration. So yeah, man, I don't know. It's wild. I'm uncomfortable with all of this. I think in a perfect world, some of these individuals say, nope, we don't want to be involved, especially in light of recent events. But I don't think that that's happening right now, Rob. And so we move.
Moving on to a World Cup topic. So, remind you that World Cup coverage on Morning Kickaround is brought to you by Oakland County Football Club, celebrating 10 years of summer soccer in Southeast Michigan in 2026. Visit Oakland County FC online for more information. So, over the weekend, an official in German soccer calls for some debate on German team and the FA boycotting World Cup 2026.
Yeah, so this made a lot of this kind of got out of the bubble a bit, if you know what I'm saying. The last couple of days, obviously, again, there's a lot going on in our own country, and a lot going on that is tragic and sad. And again, thank you to Mr. Bob for supporting the show. And obviously, I do think that's a nice gesture, the 10 seconds of silence for those who have lost their lives among what's going on in Minnesota. So you have all of this political backdrop, this tumult, the things that are happening in Minnesota, whatever words you want to apply to them, and there are lots that could be used. And then a German football executive. This is the headline, right? Without any context, what everybody sees, German football executive urges World Cup boycott to protest Trump. Now, I think, and everybody I saw that's not a soccer person that was sort of jumping on board with this and saying, yes, do this. Again, you understand where their politics are, right? You do this because this is the weapon, or this is the thing that Europe has in its back pocket that it could use to apply some pressure on the current administration. Again, based on some things that people are not happy about. And it's not just about what's going on in Minnesota. There are many other things. We could talk about Venezuela. We could talk about Greenland. We could talk about all that stuff, right? And of course, Europe has a vested interest in what's going on in Greenland. So why wouldn't they want to leverage their power in regard to sports to maybe push back on what the administration is trying to do in that part of the world. But again, if you are a soccer person and you read the story and you see that it's okay, Gottlich, president of Bundesliga club St. Pauli and a vice president of the German Football Association, that he said in an interview with German media that the time had come to, quote, seriously consider and discuss a boycott. And he compared it to the Cold War era Olympic boycotts of the 80s. And remember, the Americans boycotted a World Cup, the Russians boycotted a World Cup, all that stuff was out there, right? The Russian bloc basically boycotted a World Cup back in the 80s. But it's that club identification, St. Pauli, which stands out. Now, that this does not mean it doesn't mean something, or that he doesn't have some influence, because, of course, he is a vice president of the German Football Association. But, Rob, what do you know about St. Pauli as a club?
St. Pauli, I would say, leans to the left in the greater soccer landscape.
Leans?
Is
Rob,
the left.
leans?
Amongst the most vocal and polarizing left clubs in the entire planet.
They're about as far left as you can go.
But I don't think their argument should be discounted by that political. This is a humanitarian.
No, it shouldn't. Look, it shouldn't be discounted. It's still important, but I do think it allows some people to maybe sideline this comment a bit. And certainly it doesn't indicate a real appetite on the part of the German FA. It indicates that one gentleman who is a VP of the German Football Association and is at St. Pauli, president of St. Pauli, which is a club whose entire ethos is about leftist politics. You know, they want to win some soccer games, but the character of the club is very much leftist politics. When he says it, it can be sent, it can kind of be thought of as, all right, this was always going to be the first guy, but you really need somebody who's at a club that doesn't have the character of St. Pauli, or you need a different German football executive or a different European football executive who isn't tied to a club that has distinct leftist politics to say it, for to feel like it's something that could actually happen. Do you know what I'm saying, Rob? So when you look at this, you don't go, oh, we're on our way to a boycott. You go, okay, all right. So, okay, Gottlich thinks that we should boycott. That's a good first step, but it's only a small first step.
It is a small first step. And looking through history, having entire swaths and informal groups commit to a boycott, unlikely. And even in those big situations, they often defer to the individuals to make that decision, which I don't think is necessarily fair. Obviously, boycotts have long-lasting ramifications over time, and it's definitely something to be considered seriously, but we do live in serious times. In addition to this German official, we referenced it on our segment last week about there being a petition in Holland, and that petition to the Dutch Football Association has reported nearly 150,000 signatures put on it. So that's a statement in its own right.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. There are different paths towards a boycott, and there are different kinds of boycotts, and they will have different kinds of power. So, again, just to bring up how all of us here are soccer people, when we kind of maybe have an innate understanding of some of these things that people who don't pay attention to the game have, right? Or they just don't have it. And it's what I'm saying is, I'm not trying to be a cynic. I'm not trying to say this doesn't mean anything. I'm just saying you have to consider the context. So when my wife, who only knows soccer through what I tell her because she otherwise does not care, says to me, oh, I've seen on my Instagram stories that there's a boycott, or that the boycott's possible, I have to, without being a jerk about it, explain to her, yeah, well, okay, maybe. There are fans who want to boycott, but if there are fans to replace those fans, what does that boycott really mean, except for as a gesture? It is a public statement, but it doesn't go beyond that if it doesn't actually hurt FIFA or the World Cup, right? And then you have the potential boycott of national teams and federations. To me, that is obviously much more powerful. It is much more damaging to the World Cup to have Germany or any other nation say, we ain't going, we're not playing, we're not entering that country. There is too much going on that we cannot stand idly by and let happen without making a statement. Now, I guess one thing that you have to consider is the politics of this. Obviously, if the German government, or I'm just using them because of Oki Gottlich and what he said, the German government says to the FA, hey, don't go to the World Cup. We need you to boycott the World. We're boycotting the World Cup. That's not happening. What does FIFA do, Rob? Because FIFA has this policy about government interference in football. So what do? They punish the German FA. Now, maybe the German FA takes that into account and they're just fine with it because the stakes are that high. I don't know. And I don't know when we get there. Like, I don't know when we get to that point. And I know that a bunch of our stories, a bunch of our segments on these issues, when we talk about the World Cup, we talk about the issues getting into the country and some of the things that the State Department is doing right now. You talk about Greenland, you talk about Venezuela, you talk about what's going on in Minnesota. We have people from outside the United States commenting on our videos. I don't want to go. People shouldn't go, right? And I don't know when we get to a tipping point where that actually matters, because we are still, 5 months out from the World Cup.
Yeah, in this day and age, 5 months, where the heck are any of us going to be in 5 months? It's really hard to say. I mean, we had a moment of silence at the beginning of the show for folks that obviously won't be able to participate and be there for that. And who knows what the world will bring in the time there, and what would it take? What would be the straw that broke the camel's back to have a whole swath of official organizations beyond individuals to actually, jump to that conclusion and make that decision? Because it'll be huge, absolutely huge. Because you detailed the countries that had been boycotted in the future, or in the past rather, and the United States were not amongst that group that have been boycotted in instances past. So definitely stepping into uncharted territories here.
Which is we got I mentioned the boycott of the Olympics, but that was obviously Cold War politics, not as much about things. It depends on how you look at it, but it was about Cold War politics more than anything else. But yes, the United States has had an Olympics boycotted by parts of the world, but you might be able to kind of dismiss that because it felt more tit for tat than anything else.
Yeah, tit for tat nature rather than like a singular, pointing at us, like we are specifically boycotting that specific country, not in retaliation to another thing. That's a much more articulate way to say it, right? No?
I mean, we boycotted we boycotted the Summer Olympics in 1980. And the Russia and the Russian bloc, the Warsaw Pact countries boycotted 84 in LA. Did they boycott us because we boycotted them, and we boycotted them for real reasons, and they boycotted us for nonsense reasons? I'll leave that to your own. Yeah, I'll let you decide on that. I mean, again, those boycotts, the politics being the high level geopolitics being the thing, rather than sort of a rejection of American policies in a number of places, or again, the safety of people. I don't know. That's a different thing.
All right, we're going to move on, but I want to remind you guys that World Cup coverage on Morning Kickaround is brought to you by Oakland County Football Club, who are celebrating 10 years of summer soccer in Southeast Michigan in 2026. Visit Oakland County FC online for more information. Next story here this morning. We're just after almost a year since USL announced that they will be starting a new first division league. And we're kind of picking up the breadcrumbs still with not a lot of official information brought to you. And so I think we're kind of trying to pick through. There's a kind of three cohorts of teams that have acknowledged that they've applied for first division football. Then there's maybes, the groups that look like they're angling to get within those requirements for a first division teams. And then there's a third group of some maybe plans, and then some MLS shadows lurking over those cities. So maybe let's start with the for sure's. Which USL teams have actually acknowledged that they've applied for first division status?
Which are those, Rob? I thought you had the list in front of you. I do not have that list.
Well, that's the question. That's the question. So we know that there's actually an article and an announcement from Louisville City.
Okay.
They have officially said that they were applying to be a first division side, and actually their Lynn Family Stadium was 12K, and they announced that they are bulking up, adding a few more seats to get to that 15,000 seat requirement for a first division team under the current set of PLS requirements.
This is Lynn Family Stadium, right? So we've got a nice little soccer venue, horseshoe shape, open end. There's views and things of that nature that I guess they want to highlight there. What I don't have, and I don't think is out there because I couldn't find it, Rob, is some sort of rendering of what an expanded Lynn Family Stadium might look like. And maybe they aren't to that point, or maybe it's why put out a rendering when the stadium already exists. I don't know. Obviously, Lynn Family Stadium has been a success story in American soccer. It was a second division soccer specific stadium in a country where that was difficult to imagine as recently as 15 years ago. And they've hosted major events and things like that. But obviously, again, as long as the PLS that are currently in place remain in place, you need 15K. And that seems like a good plan. They don't intend to change the horseshoe shape based on the current reporting around expanding Lynn Family Stadium, which I think is a little disappointing only because, when you enclose the entire building, you get that sound, you get obviously you would have options for more seats on the open end of the stadium. But this is number one. So Louisville City is on the list. Who else is on the list?
Pittsburgh Riverhounds announced that they are going to expand their stadium, Highmark, up to 15,000 seats. Once state funding is secured, got to look into the funding requirements, but they definitely announced that they are expanding their stadium along the riverside there to 15,000.
Yeah, the footprint of this stadium is small, so they're going to have to be creative, which is why you see this weird horseshoe. I mean, the Lynn Family Stadium is a normal kind of horseshoe. Here is different kind of horseshoe. This is a fat-sided horse. I don't know how to describe that. And part of that obviously is for the river view and across the river to downtown Pittsburgh or whatever you can see from there. The renderings we got from Pittsburgh, and we talked about these renderings when they dropped, are extremely basic. So I don't know, I don't know if they're going to kind of evolve their renderings. Obviously, Pittsburgh is a big city. It's a city with an NHL team and an NFL team and a Major League Baseball team. They absolutely should be able to support a soccer team with 15,000 seats in their stadium. So Pittsburgh's on the list. Who else is on the list?
Detroit City Football Club. They have knocked down the old hospital that was on the site that you see in front of you. And they are going to get this built and are preparing to have their final season at Keyworth move here. And the official, actually, when they initially announced the stadium, it was for 12K. And then when USL announced their vote in the positive to start a first division league, they altered the plans a bit to expand this planned Alumnify Field in Detroit. And on this show, Sean Mann verified that they had applied for first division status. And so they're in the for sure category for teams that are going for that first division. As we're saying, we're going through this trying to parse who might qualify for that first division status. And we know for sure that they have applied to be a part of that first year in the first division of USL.
Obviously, another big market, right? Certainly one that in terms of that PLS, that standard meets the requirement that USL has to have for their first division if the current PLS hold. I think it's 3/4 of the league has to be in markets that have more than 1 million people or something like that. No problem for Detroit there. Obviously an ambitious club and have been growing, and it's an incredible story. This stadium, this field, it's Alumni Field, not Alumni Stadium, so that's on your boy over here for the caption. But it is obviously just three stands, and I guess there would be some seating, obviously, in that sort of open end, rather than an enclosed stadium. That'll probably save on some costs and that kind of thing. But it looks very nice, and we're excited for it. So Detroit City's on the list. Who else is on the list?
The Miami FC. And this is a curious one because they meet the stadium standards where they play at Florida International University. But we also had renderings released not too long ago south of Miami for a soccer-specific stadium that was going to be large in size too. So they are a little bit curious. They had Miami FC had amongst the lowest attendance in USL Championship last year, but are showing some of the biggest building plan ambitions. So a curious case there for Miami FC.
Yeah, I don't have the rendering for the Homestead Stadium that they announced they intend to build. I guess that, that will meet the target. Homestead is down south. I mean, it is not necessarily right there in Miami. I guess they meet all the other standards. They've always been ambitious because they have an owner in Ricardo Silva who has always been a, a boat rocker in American soccer. I mean, he's one of those guys who made a big offer to MLS for their television rights if they would institute pro rel. Like he was, trying to make things happen on that front. A guy involved in international television rights, I think, is where he made a lot of his money. So Miami's an interesting one. I think there's one more, Rob, we should mention before we move on.
What are we talking about? Tampa?
No, I think we're talking about Sacramento, right? Didn't you say
Oh,
Sacramento?
of course. How could I forget about Sacramento? At long last, their plans for a permanent stadium look to be coming to fruition after a kind of a long battle to get a site and the plans in motion.
Yeah, this is I think this is the current look that they're going for. Open air, no roof, much more scaled down from the original plan, which was an enclosed, extremely impressive looking building. But that was when the MLS expansion effort was ongoing and they were really pushing for Major League Soccer. They seem to have acknowledged that that's not happening, at least not anytime soon. So here we go. Let's get a stadium built, a proper home for a team that doesn't have a problem drawing. Rob, setting attendance records in the second division have Sacramento Republic, and I think they're still among the top attended teams in the league. And so again, even if this isn't necessarily the best stadium possible for a soccer team, I think this is obviously a big deal to move forward. And Sacramento is a place that wants to be first division, whatever that means.
All right, so that is 5 sites and 5 cities, 5 clubs that we have some confidence in and some assurances, whether it be upgrading their facilities or actually communicating that they have applied for the first division. So that's only 5, and this first division will need 10 to 12 teams in order to complete that. And I think we may need to come back to a part 2 for our maybes and our shrug of the shoulder maybes to come back. So we might need to have a part 2 of this segment, as we do have our guest waiting in the wings. You got something for us before we move on?
Let's do that. We'll I know the chat is humming along, talking about other places that could be hosts to top division teams when USL does this. So we'll consider those teams, those stadium situations, those markets when we come back later.
All right. We are going to shift gears for a minute, and we are going to talk about the sale of Sporting Kansas City. What's going on the ground there for World Cup preparations with Daniel Sperry when we come right back with Get to Know Your District, Kansas City, here on Monday's edition of Morning Kick Around. All right, Get to Know Your District, Kansas City, here on Morning Kick Around, and detail all the events that have been happening recently in the world of Sporting Kansas City. Now, welcome by Daniel Sperry from Kansas City Star to give us some of the local details on the purchase of the MLS team there and what might be happening as far as World Cup preparations. Good morning, Daniel. Thank you for joining us here.
Good morning, guys. Thanks for having me. It's quite cold here in Kansas City. We're starting to thaw out a little bit.
Oh, well, good for you. We're not there yet on the East Coast. We got all the snow and everything. Anyway, good. I have been in Kansas City in January. It is a hellscape some of the time. Not the city itself, but the weather. Daniel, thank you for coming by. There's lots of things happening in Kansas City. Obviously, the sale of Sporting Kansas City, or I guess the reshuffling of ownership to bring in a new majority owner, a guy who has strong roots to the city and has been a sports guy, I guess, in terms of his investments and his history. What does that mean? First of all, tell us a little bit about him and what does it mean for Sporting?
Yeah, Peter Maluk is he's owned Creative Planning, which is a very large asset wealth management company. He bought it, sold it. He's worth, I think, upwards of $11 billion in net worth. Very, very wealthy man. young, kind of in his mid 50s, and he is a local Kansas City guy, big time. He did all of his undergrad and graduate work at University of Kansas. He's got kids at University of Kansas. I mean, he is a Kansas City guy through and through. He's had a minority stake in Sporting Kansas City since 2020, late 2022, early 2023, and then as well in the Kansas City Royals. Sporting, it's been interesting to see the rumors kind of percolate over the last few months, either hearing things perfectly clear that were not. It seemed like the writing was on the wall behind the scenes that some sort of reshuffling was on the cards. Just little piece of information kind of leaking out over the last 5-6 months kind of hinted that maybe something was on the horizon. So I don't think when the Forbes report came out a couple of weeks ago that I was entirely shocked by the official nature at what went through here. The Illigs have been the owners of Sporting Kansas City for a very, very long time. And, this is just kind of I'll say that they don't have as many business ventures outside of Sporting Kansas City at the moment. And I think they were kind of in a spot where it made sense, I think, for the better health of the club going forward in terms of what can be put in, the type of investment that can be put into the club on a more regular basis to maybe have this shift. And Peter has been a guy that has been mainly in the background intentionally for the last couple of years. And I think his timing into kind of jumping into the foreground, and very willing to be doing TV interviews, interviews with print newspapers and stuff like that with our outlet. Like he's ready for kind of this ownership eventually when it comes. But the Illigs in their history, they'll stick on the board of governors. They're very involved in a lot of the committees, especially the competition committee, deeply involved in that work to kind of flip the MLS calendar to the Euro calendar as well. So they will retain that board seat, I guess, for the foreseeable future.
I wanted to say real quick, I guess there's some rule that there has to be a Peter at the top of the organization in Kansas City.
So. I guess so. We went with a 9-month void, I guess, and had to get him back in there.
I want to continue on this a little bit. You mentioned the pockets that Maluk brings to owning Sporting Kansas City. If this is his only sports enterprise, his only sports club that he owns, then obviously that means something good could happen here for Sporting, as the attention from a guy with pockets that deep is on the club. And in the current environment, MLS, and yes, everybody's complaining about Inter Miami, but the thing about Miami is, yeah, they have some advantages built in, but Jorge Mas is willing to spend money. And although in MLS, it's not quite as important how much money you spend, it's still important how much money you spend, Daniel. So does Maluk feel like a guy who's going to level Sporting Kansas City up a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the big things that he said right away in our interview with our columnist, Sam McDowell, is that he is going to inject a lot of cash into this team over the next year. Especially next year, they want to build on whatever they're working on this year in terms of this kind of big retool and restructure. Right now, the roster is pretty bare bones for the team. They're working on getting players in. They've just got Rafa Wicki into the head coaching spot, and that team is kind of looking to start taking steps forward for the last 2 years kind of being wasting away in the bottom of MLS and in the back of most people's minds outside of the region. And so I think he said 99.5% of what I care about is winning. And if we're not winning, then we're going to be doing something to fix that. I don't think he doesn't seem like a guy that's just going to recklessly throw cash at things and allow people to spend willy-nilly. David Lee is a guy who's spoken big about processes and making sure that every dollar is spent well and spent smartly. And I don't think any of that will change necessarily, but it does probably put Sporting Kansas City into a different market that they haven't been in for a long time. Sporting Kansas City, and Peter Vermes, when he was still in charge, used to probably flout at his own peril that he was able to do so much with so little in terms of transfer transfer fees spent. I think the fee that they spent for Alan Pulido back then is probably more than they've spent on any other fee combined in the other history of the club. And that's how little Sporting has spent in terms of getting players in and doing those kind of transfer fee works. And that changed a little bit. Last offseason, we saw, more money going into Dejan Joveljic and the cash for, as well as signing Manu Garcia and Shapi Suleimanov in like a weird 2-for-1 kind of deal in Greece. That was about $5 million. And so that's more than what's been happening. But I mean, these are kind of things that, as we've seen the way MLS has grown and the way all boats have risen, there's a few boats that have been lagging behind in that spend, and Sporting's been one of them. And I think that is an area that we are definitely going to see a good, healthy uptick, understanding where they are at within the market size and all that kind of stuff, about what is a good spend and what is a smart spend, and where they should be.
It definitely seems that you answered my question to a degree there, but obviously Sporting KC turning over a new leaf, stepping into a new era, ownership change, and then also a big change in coaching as well. So is there a sense of relief locally there? I mean, obviously, I can see online some of the most hardened or dedicated SKC fans have definitely aired some jaded outlooks on their team. Is there a promise of spending, or is there an actual relief that this is going to be a new era of operations for the team?
I think a bit of both. I wouldn't be surprised if Sporting does go out and spend a little bit in this market and a little bit in the summer window too, especially post World Cup. I think there's going to be a pretty big push to get some of those players in the summer that have been around in Kansas City, around the U.S. That wouldn't surprise me, around all of MLS, that players, after spending some time here in the World Cup, maybe think about it if they have those opportunities open. I think in terms of the vibe, I feel like fans are excited about the prospects of new ownership, right? That does give them some hope. Some of them are in the weeds. I live and breathe and die with this team every waking second of every day, and I'm constantly checking online for transfer rumors and all that kind of stuff. They might be frustrated with the roster situation. I mean, Sporting's roster is pretty small. They have pretty bare bones on outfield players, and they have 4 goalkeepers, and fans are kind of scratching their head of like, oh my gosh, how many players are actually going to be on the roster by opening day? And I think that's a valid concern for where they're at the moment, especially kind of where they're at in the calendar itself, and how close we are to opening weekend. I think those fans are more concerned that this year is maybe not going to be as quick of a turnaround as they hoped, in terms of, from where things were last season to where things were at opening day. And I would push back a little bit and say this team's not going to be an MLS contender opening day. That's just not the way it's going to be with the roster that's built, and how much work that they needed to do. But at the same time, in the long term, there's a lot of good projected direction that if the right decisions continue to be made for the club, that I think not only do you see a fair amount of these young players that are going to get some time here, and players that seems like the club is going to trust to help lead the next charge forward, and that they'll add to that in the coming transfer windows, and turn this team maybe back into something that has a competitive core, and ready to move.
Yeah, one of our ultras is telling us Kansas City's GAM is not as maybe strong as some of the other teams out there in terms of what they can do with their roster. So I think there's probably going to be a lot of optimism. I think Raphael Wiki is an interesting choice, and I don't necessarily mean complimentary to that, Daniel, just because his history is a little spotty here. He had some success in Switzerland after leaving MLS, and I know he wants to prove himself here. Maybe just a couple seconds on Raphael Wiki before I get into some other questions around Kansas City as a soccer market.
Yeah, I think Rafa is an interesting choice. One of the things that they kind of fell in, he fits the profile, if we'll be honest. I mean, we look back at like the coaches that came back into MLS and did really well last year. Sandro Schwartz, Jesper Sorensen came from those smaller, high level of success in some of these smaller European leagues that came over with a high pressing, high attacking kind of style. I think he will bring that. I am interested to see what he does with the roster itself. I don't think Sporting's maybe overall sporting operation is what Chicago's was back in 2020, 2021. I think that probably bodes a lot much better for him. But I understand some of the concern in looking at what happened in Chicago, looking at maybe the way the U.S. men's the under 17s played in that World Cup, getting grouped in a pretty difficult group, but still getting grouped. And those are some of those things that maybe I understand where there's hesitation there. It'll be interesting to see exactly how it plays out. I know so far players are feel pretty good about the way things have been going at the beginning of this camp. I will say, to the experience he has on his staff, I think is a little bit different than what he had last time. Having a Dom Kinnear, someone who's been through a lot of phases of MLS and been a part of a pretty healthy rebuild in Cincinnati as well, is really key to have some experience, not only with the American player, but with MLS and success in recent MLS, as well as, there's still some continuity with some of the other members on that staff.
Yeah, I would say that for anybody who doesn't know their MLS history, Dom Kinnear, a coach who's won multiple championships on his as in his own right, and also a great consigliere to have next to you on an MLS bench. So that is definitely a good thing. We have a message here from Riverside Grow. Do players want to sign to play in Kansas City in December, January, February? That gets us into the calendar switch, which you mentioned in passing, Daniel, because the Illigs are still going to be on the Board of Governors, and they were involved in that. Now, everybody's focused on Montreal and Toronto and Minnesota and places like that for the weather when it switches.
Mm-hmm.
What's the general consensus on the calendar switch among the Sporting Kansas City faithful? And ultimately, what do you think it means for Kansas City that MLS is going to turn the calendar over and play through mostly the winter?
Well, I think that the interesting thing about the climate in Kansas City, I feel like true winter doesn't actually start until after January 1st. We might get one good snowstorm, and I think this year we did a little bit after, right? It was like beginning of December. Randomly, one day we got 4 inches of snow, and I swear it was melted by Friday. That's just kind of how weather goes. So December should be kind of like November around here. We're talking like 40s, 50s. That's about what we're looking at, with maybe an occasional really cold pop with some snow. Same in February. Remember, the MLS calendar is not going to be being played through January in these cold markets, just like it currently is. So I don't think it's going to have much of an effect in a place like Kansas City. I think in some of those places further north, where you actually have more extended winters and earlier starts to that freezing cold, places like Minnesota, Montreal, as those mentioned, I think those are the ones that are probably going to see the greater effect in all this. But I think Kansas City, the way our climate is set up here, by mid-February, I mean, I was kind of looking at some advanced things, and they're the latest projection is that Sporting KC's home game on the 28th against the Columbus Crew will be the high of that day is going to be 60 degrees in February. So I don't think Kansas City is a market that is going to share much concern. And I think for the most part, fans of Kansas City are on board with the idea of the switch, because what we hear from a lot of casuals is that, come fall, or come the early part in March, especially with Kansas basketball, people really care about the college sports here. I mean, there's the Chiefs, there's the Royals, and there's pro soccer. Outside of that, then it's the collegiate teams that people really care about and quote unquote have their time conflicts. And now Sporting's really good. I don't think that conflict actually matters, but not having as much competition with those is probably what Sporting Kansas City and what MLS have been looking for.
Now, I will say, okay, just because I think it's, and I cannot, if there are veterans of MLS and covering the game in this country who were on hand for the 2013 MLS Cup final in Kansas City, which happened in December, Daniel. You're telling me, hey, we don't really get much winter until January. I nearly died.
There's a lot of people that nearly died at the game, and I'm telling you, there's like 1 week in December where you've just better hope that game's on the road.
I'm giving you a hard time. Obviously, it's interesting because you think about, yes, the Chiefs are going to dominate, right? And they're going to dominate the tension during the NFL season. If they have a really good season, they push into January and maybe early February. I hope not. I'm a Broncos fan. But there's, everybody pour some out for my guys. The issue, obviously, of fighting for attention is already a thing, right? MLS is doing that now, and the back end of the season, the most important part of the season, is in conflict with the NFL and college football, which doesn't do MLS any favors, hence this change. So it's interesting to hear you say that most fans would be on board with this.
Yeah. Shifting gears, though, we're talking about the cold, and Major League Soccer's calendar change and the cautious optimism with the new coach and ownership. Shifting to the summer, though, the hot months, Kansas City is going to be hosting World Cup games. One of the host cities hosting 6 games, going to be a base location for teams, and we'll have a FIFA fan festival there. So a big epicenter of World Cup happening in KC. So kind of boots on the ground, what do the preparations look like? Are there any obvious signs of these things happening? What is the outlook locally on World Cup 2026 in Kansas City?
Yeah, I mean, I think local leaders have done an incredible job of keeping this at the forefront of most Kansas Cityans' mind, whether it's by releases, whether it's working with volunteers and stuff like that. The preparation has been pretty extensive. Even some of the bus ideas, and that would, Kansas City does not have great public transportation, if any public transportation. We're cheering the streetcar getting extended further into the quote unquote downtown footprint finally, and maybe actually being able to ride a streetcar all the way to a KC Current game this spring. That's about it for public transportation to the airport, to where all the hotels are at in different parts of the metroplex. Buses are going to be the thing, and FIFA has pretty lauded the efforts that the Kansas City bid has put together for transportation and kind of where it is. Arrowhead, relatively far outside the city center, not terribly far, but we're talking at least 10 miles from city epicenter, which is going to be a good 10-15 minute drive from downtown. And if you're in other spots of the metro, that can be 20-30 minutes, and depending on traffic, it could be even a little bit longer. Although as someone who grew up in California, Kansas City doesn't have real traffic. It's a joke, it's a farce. So when we say traffic, we're like, oh, it added 10 minutes to the commute. But I think there's definitely signs, and I think that the big conversation right now is the base camp. We know a lot of the major teams have announced where they're doing base camp. It is pretty hard rumors here that England, Argentina, and the Netherlands all will be camp basing in Kansas City. So it's unsurprising to me that a lot of the major teams looked at a potential 3-hour flight at most to any of their group stage games as something very wanted and sought after. And it kind of makes sense that a couple of these teams here with very high up in that FIFA ranking that probably could have gone anywhere they wanted, now all of a sudden are all fighting against each other to be in Kansas City. England, I think, really wanted Sporting KC's facility. They've opted for Sporting KC's secondary facility, which used to be their facility out at Swope Park. Is the rumor there. And then there's also rumors that Argentina will take Sporting's facility, and that the Netherlands will be at the KC Current's new facility that they've tacked on to their existing facility in Riverside, Missouri. So 3 of the big boys coming to Kansas City potentially, and another potentially out in Lawrence at the University of Kansas as well. So there's potential for 4 teams to be hosted kind of within the Kansas City bid footprint. Lawrence is now 40 minutes from downtown. So that is still kind of out there and kind of removed from the chaos and craziness that will probably ensue downtown around Kansas City. But yeah, organizers, the mayor, everyone's been kind of at the forefront of putting this on the radar, and the preparations, some of the drawings for the Fan Fest kind of out front of the World War I memorial look awesome. It's pretty cool. So I think there's a lot of hype in the city. There's also a lot of like, okay, we have no idea how insane this is going to be, and kind of just the acceptance of that for a city this size, of what it's going to be like here for not just, we talk about the NFL draft and how it was when Kansas City hosted the NFL draft. And we've been trying to remind people it's going to be like that for darn near a month here in Kansas City, going from, when teams arrive at the start of the group stage and games start playing. First game in Kansas City is June 16th. And then that quarterfinal match, which if Portugal and Argentina both finish top of their group and win out into the quarterfinal stage, Ronaldo and Messi will face off in the World Cup quarterfinals at Arrowhead Stadium. I mean, there's a lot of Kansas City hopes on that, being able to circle that, a marquee moment in soccer history to get those two against each other in a World Cup happening in Kansas City would be the smallest of all the bid cities, would be kind of crazy.
Pretty incredible. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, quarterfinal in Kansas City between two of the biggest marquee names in the game would be pretty incredible. So you're saying it sounds like people are well aware of this is happening. This is in the forefront. They're starting to see. You said that some of the Fan Fest is already built. Can you detail like kind of what's all going into the Fan Fest stuff?
FanFest stuff hasn't quite been built. I know once we kind of get through this winter stretch, I think some of that type of construction will pop up. Similar to the scenes of the NFL draft. The NFL draft was held at Union Station, which kind of within this footprint of the downtown area in Kansas City is north, and then the World War I memorial sits on a giant hill there, and then behind the World War I memorial there's a really big grass berm, and in front of it there's a hill down towards Union Station. They will be hosting that World Cup watch party behind the World War I memorial, which is kind of a big giant tower. If you look it up, it's got great view of downtown from it, but it is so that they'll be hosting the World Cup watch party there. It's a place that they host large outdoor concerts. They've done the Chapel Roan concert that they did over the summer, the 2 nights of Chapel Roan, kind of in the same spot, and a great prep run for that. What it'll be like to have thousands of people down there. The World Cup, or sorry, not the World Cup, but the NFL draft, of course, too, being held at Union Station in that area just kind of gives that same vibe. And so it's an area that Kansas City is used to hosting pretty large events and concerts around Memorial Day. They do a huge concert with the symphony, and people fill the grass berm and they light off fireworks by the World War I memorial. It's a pretty awesome area, good views of downtown, and I think so. Kansas Cityans know what that's going to be like. I think when the stages and all that kind of stuff gets built out, it'll look pretty awesome. At least from all the renderings that we've seen, it looks pretty sweet. But yeah, fans, like you said, fans are very well aware. I don't know how many times people know what I do. That don't care about soccer, they are still stopping and talking to me and asking me about all the different rumors, the different things we've heard, and what's going to be happening. What should I expect? People are interested. I think Kansas Cityans, regardless, take great civic pride in their city. That's something I've realized before I moved here, and I've seen it very quickly as I live here now for about a decade. And it is very clearly fans are going to pay attention, even if they don't really pay attention to soccer, just because Kansas City is going to be at the forefront of something.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's definitely great to hear that the World Cup fever is being grasped and being, there's a fervor in Kansas City for this. That's great to hear. And folks in the chat loving the conversation. One of our MK Ultras gifting 5 morning kick around membership. So thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Daniel, for bringing this information not only on the sale of SKC, but on the World Cup fever spreading to your town. Now, you work for the local newspaper there in town. How is the Kansas City Star, and you specifically, how are you going to be covering this? Do you have a kind of a plan of action just yet?
Yeah, I will probably be more on match coverage type things, either at the game if I can get credentials, Lord willing, and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's going to be a crazy, chaotic process, right? But yeah, a little bit more. Of course, the soccer thing is my expertise, and those who follow the city government, local government, and all that have been doing a great job of pitching in, chiming in, talking with the host committee, and doing all of that. And I think our paper as a whole has done a really good job of understanding that the scale of what is coming to the town, and trying to cover it in all of its angles and all that. So,
all right, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Kick Around, and looking forward to continued coverage not only of this new era for SKC, but for World Cup 2026 as it all takes place in Kansas City this year. Thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Kick Around.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Daniel.
All right, big shout out to Ryan Smeltzer once again for gifting 5 memberships. So if those haven't been taken already, jump on that now.
This is how we dot the map. This is how it happens. Thank you to Ryan. Thank you very much. I know we've had Lots of people give out gift memberships, and not always have those converted into continuing memberships. Maybe some people let them lapse and forgot. So, we're trying to build slowly. Sometimes we take a little bit of a step back, Rob, but this is a growing situation. We are definitely moving in the right direction, and people like Ryan Smeltzer are a reason why. People like Mr. Bob, who is our spotlight today. We did take Mr. Bob's name off of the screen because it was messing up the vertical version of the show for people watching over there, but wanted to shout out Mr. Bob again.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Mr. Bob, for your continued support. And thank you to Ryan and all the other MK Ultras that are supporting the show. And we're going to catch our breath, but we're going to come right back and continue our conversation about USL's first division and who might populate that when that gets going here on Morning Kick Around. Coming right back here on Morning Kick Around, continuing our conversation on who may populate the first division in the USL when it launches, speculatively in the 2028 season as it lands. And we noted some of the teams that were confident that are striving for this first division, and those who have applied. We know for sure Louisville City, Pittsburgh, Sacramento, Detroit City FC, and Miami FC. Then we get into a little bit of murkier territory. Of course, if USL First Division is to hit that PLS standards, I believe they need 10 to 12 teams to fit the sanctioning guidelines. So we're going to move from confident to some maybes to be part of this debut First Division. I would say this kind of goes, this group, that list of for sure's is pretty short when you really hammer down on it, because then we're getting into these maybes. And first team on the maybe list is Jacksonville Sporting Jacks. They are entering into the USL Championship this year, and they currently play in a stadium, or they plan to play in University of North Florida's Hodges Stadium, which currently has a capacity of 9,400, not hitting that 15,000 mark. But there is moves behind the scenes and some speculation on building a 15,000 soccer-specific stadium, because they do have some big money backers, including a squad of former NFL quarterbacks.
Yeah, we talked about this. Who is involved in that group?
We got Johnny Elway, we got Blake Bortles, we got Timmy Tebow.
Tim Tebow, yeah, that's what I forgot. How did I forget John Elway? Only Jason's hero from his youth.
Yeah, you're trying to forget about the Broncos, right? You're trying to forget about the Broncos.
No, you know what? We had a good run. We can't get into that. We ran into a weird situation with a backup quarterback in a snowstorm, Rob. I don't know what to talk. I can't say anything about that. I'm lucky my voice is still working. Probably my voice works because there was less to yell about in the second half of that game. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Jacksonville. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. There's a good point, but you say Jacksonville. What were you going to say?
No, I mean, Jacksonville is obviously a town that meets the requirement in terms of the size of the market, which, again, look, I want to be clear about these PLS things, because when we did our first video on this after USL announced their intention to launch the first division, it remains the most popular video that we've ever done on this channel, because people are very intrigued by this idea, and they want to talk about who could be in this first division. And I want to be clear, we are not backing the PLS. We are not supporting the idea of these standards being the standards to decide who's in a first division league. These are just the standards that exist. So until it is said otherwise, until it's reported otherwise, until some agreement is made or there's some change to the PLS, or US Soccer rewrites the PLS, these are the guidelines we have to work with, right? And again, it's 3/4 of the teams in markets big enough to meet the standard. It's 15,000 seat stadiums. That is across the board, although of course waivers can be granted, and we're not saying there won't be waivers. We just cannot say, well, they're going to give a waiver to Jacksonville. We don't know that. We have no way of knowing that. So what we are saying is these are teams, these are cities, these are markets, these are clubs that can meet the standards in relatively short order, so USL doesn't have to ask for a bunch of waivers. That would be the ideal situation for them. Jacksonville, look, if you look at Hodges Stadium, if you go and find a picture of it ain't much. right? It's a big stand in front of a track. That's basically what Hodges Stadium is. It's not ideal for soccer. I'm sure that they imagine themselves building a soccer stadium in Jacksonville in short order. They will not be able to do that in time to meet the first division standard. So it's tough for me to talk about Jacksonville. It makes sense as a big city, an NFL sized city that could support a team at this level and support a 15,000 seat stadium, but it's not there yet. I think we had a comment earlier when we were talking about this. They laid out, and this person is not an ultra, so I'm not going to throw it up on screen. But shout out to Regino. Atletico Dallas, that's a football stadium. The Cotton Bowl, that holds way more than 15,000. So they would meet that standard, and they're in a big market. Oakland Roots, currently playing in the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum. That meets the standard, although we know that they have plans to build on a dock. That plan in Oakland, Rob, do you recall when we talked about it just the other day? Is that a 15,000 seat stadium?
No,
Because
it
that's
wasn't.
important. It was smaller than that, right? It was something like 10 or 12. And that may be footprint, that may be cost, there may be a lot of reasons. They could get a waiver in Oakland, but again, we don't know for sure that they would get one. I will also point out, because I believe Mr. Bob is in the chat and has said that New Mexico consistently draws 9 to 10,000 fans in their minor league baseball venue that they currently play in. They are pushing to build a stadium, and they've had some pushback from the NIMBY people, and they're trying to figure out the lawsuits and all these things. And I think they remain relatively confident, but I don't think their target is 15. Their target is something like 12,000, which would require a waiver. And I don't know about Albuquerque's market size to know if they would fit that standard. Obviously, again, you don't have to have every team in big markets or that size markets, but it'd be interesting to have to give 2 waivers to Albuquerque for that reason. Oklahoma City is a team that hasn't launched yet or relaunched yet. We know that they have a stadium plan. We showed those renderings on the show a couple weeks ago. We even talked to Korjeski. We know that they are ambitious, but their ambition is 11,000 seats. It is not 15. So big enough market maybe, but is there an issue with the stadium? Also mentioned is Rhode Island, said that they want to be a first division side, but I don't think that their stadium meets that standard either. And what I don't think what you want is teams having to leave good soccer venues or venues that are better for soccer to go play in a bigger stadium just because it meets the capacity standard for PLS. That would be, I think, a net negative to USL.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. Like, walking away from something good just to expand. I mean, look at overseas at the likes of West Ham and whatnot have completely lost their footballing soul for the promise of larger audience. So the list of maybes continues. A controversial one, North Carolina FC. They shuttered their doors controversially in the middle of a playoff run, but they said their stated reason was they wanted to concentrate their budgeting and their efforts on building NCFC up to become a first division team. And a lot of people,
yeah, that idea, like, oh, we can't operate as a second division team between now and then because it doesn't make sense for us cost wise, is just such a black mark on the state of soccer in America. Like, you can't just keep playing games and give your fans something to support. That's the point, right? The point is to deliver soccer and the possibility of connecting with the passion of the game to your town. And so if we're saying, oh, the money doesn't work, and we're going to go and try to build this, and again, there is maybe no situation in lower division American soccer that is more indicative of the real estate play element of the moment than Raleigh and NCFC. Because and maybe you could throw in Indianapolis into this mix too, right? Because Indianapolis we're going to build a stadium for our second division team. The mayor was like, nah, we want MLS. It's much bigger and more important. They try to get the MLS backers. They try to court MLS. Nothing happens. They submarine the plan to build a lower division soccer stadium. And I don't know where Indy is on all this. That's another city. That's another place. It's another kind of makes sense as a potential D1 target. But what are their plans? Where will they play? Could they build a 15,000 seat stadium?
When I last reached out to my contact that did work for Indy 11, they've kind of the downtown plan got scuppered, and they are now looking at a place, a location outside of the downtown area. They basically had to completely, scrap the plans and the demolition of the site that they'd already done a bunch of work in that downtown site, but they are now looking outside of the city limits for that. So we'll keep an eye on that. I would call that them, Indy, Arizona, and Las Vegas call that like in the MLS shadow, so to speak. But the maybe list continues. I got ahead of us a little bit, almost put them into the confident category, but Tampa Bay Rowdies. You'd think that's a team with first division ambitions, but their stadium arrangements are a little unclear. Are they going to expand the baseball stadium that they are on a lease to lease with now? Or would they join in a partnership with the women's group that are building a stadium?
No, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen because I don't think there's not crossover there. I mean, I suppose there's not crossover in terms of ownership. I guess you could imagine that the Tampa Bay, which, by the way, we have not heard any progress on the Tampa Bay Sun. Now, I have not been checking in on it regularly, but nothing has bubbled up so that it makes us pay attention to what's going on with the Tampa Bay Sun. And again, that deal was supposed to be a stadium for the women's team, not an NWSL team. I just want to acknowledge that that's part of this, right? That would be a USL Super League team, not an NWSL team, or it is a Women's Super League team. Is there an appetite? Is that justified? Do the economics work? You have to recognize the economics as a factor in all of this. Now, and that's Tampa, right? And to Wes's point, the Rowdies play in St. Pete. And my understanding is that they don't want to leave St. Pete. Now, we have that new team that's launching somewhere over on the Gulf Coast. There's a plan to launch a League One team or something not too far away. In terms of the Rowdies, though, that baseball stadium that has been converted to a soccer stadium and is now the Rowdies' home. I mean, they've made it their own the best they can. I don't know that they have a lot of leeway in terms of expansion. There was a thought about expanding it and trying to attract MLS to Tampa. I think this is 10 years ago now or something like that. I'm stretching my memory, but I don't know if Tampa, for all the good things that the Rowdies have done and the size of the city and all that stuff, I don't know if they're an obvious candidate, but I think they would certainly be considered. And again, USL is based in Tampa, so they're right there in the backyard.
Some other maybes you touched on, the Oakland roots, Atletico Dallas, Fresno, that we just talked about Fresno recently. They have like a 2-stage plan with like a smaller 10 to 12 capacity modular stadium with a larger phase 2 plans for a stadium up as big as 25,000. So you'd throw them in the maybe category.
So and that's so ambitious. And so, I mean, there's so many things between now and then, Rob. That is, I mean, I would love for that to be the case, but there's so many things between now and then. They've got to get a team on the field and capture attention in Fresno. And the people that we know that have reached out to us about what's going down in Fresno have said, it's kind of a tough market. There's a lot of Latino soccer fans in Fresno, so maybe you can capture them or you can get them involved. But there's something, it's not as easy as just putting a stadium and launching a team in Fresno. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had 2 teams die already.
All right, before I want to round this segment off by kind of maybe trying to nail down 10 teams that we have a little bit of confidence in. But I've seen this comment pop up a couple times in this conversation, and this makes me very nervous. I hadn't seen this before, but a couple non-member commenters have been mentioning USL Hawaii. Okay, so I don't think we've seen any press releases or anything on that, but this is what makes me nervous for expansion bubble. So go back to the old NASL days, and you talk about the kind of where that league jumped the shark. Look up NASL's Hawaiian team, and you'll know that would be kind of a sign of the demise. I'd love Hawaii to get professional soccer, obviously, but the logistics involved in that would just, I mean, going from East Coast to West Coast is one thing, but flying and transporting a team and all that on the regularly to and from Hawaii, I don't think is realistic at this juncture.
Yeah, so I don't, I don't
any juncture?
Love, well, I don't love being the guy to rain on a parade if there's excitement around something. Hawaii has always been a very tough nut to crack when it comes to professional sports. And yeah, you go back to the NASL days and you look at Team Hawaii or whatever they were called, which by the way, was a team that had moved like 4 different times from like Rochester to Tulsa. I'm making this up. I don't have the exact cities in front of me, but I think that something like that, and ended up in Hawaii. And if we're going to talk about Hawaii, we have to talk about Puerto Rico, right? Because obviously I have a vested interest in soccer in Puerto Rico because my wife is from there and I go there often. There were rumors around the Molina brothers being involved in an effort to bring professional soccer back to Puerto Rico. Bad Bunny was going to have some role to play. I don't think it's his money necessarily, but some role to play. But you always run into that issue. The economics are very, very difficult. There's no way to have a local rivalry. You have to fly very far. You have to pay for those tickets. You have to ship everybody to the place to play away. Everybody has to go to Puerto Rico, which adds cost on the other side. Going to Hawaii, excuse me. Let's focus on Hawaii. So I would love for that to happen. Like I would love for those places to have soccer presences in America, but it makes it so difficult because of their locations. And it's unfortunate because obviously Hawaii is a state. And so the only place you can play soccer if you're a Hawaiian professional team is in the American League. I mean, where else could you go? The geography is really bad for Hawaii. For Puerto Rico, at least you could imagine, let's do some Caribbean League or something, which FIFA would have to give dispensation, and that's not happening, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I play French Horn has my relocation path. I thought it was Tulsa, then Hawaii, but it's not. It's San Antonio, then Hawaii, then Tulsa. That was the relocation of that franchise back in the NASL days when there were a lot of shady individuals involved in running soccer teams in America.
Yeah, if you haven't seen already, throwback to the Tulsa Roughnecks jerseys and the logo were pretty cool. So in our breadcrumbs, almost a year later, who's going to be in USL's new first division? We've got 5 confidents: Louisville, Pittsburgh, Sacramento, DCFC, and Miami. Then we have 10 maybes. We've got Jacksonville, North Carolina, Tampa Bay, New Mexico, Tulsa, OKC, Atletico Dallas, Oakland, Fresno, San Antonio, and 3 in the MLS shadow: Indy, Arizona, Las Vegas. So out of those, is there a realistic 12 for those that are going to be ready by 2028?
Well, again, waivers are going to be a major part of this. And I think, and we talked about this when it was announced, I think USL, they fired a shot across the U.S. soccer bow. Maybe not meant to necessarily start a war, but meant to send a message. And the message is, hey, we want to do a first division league. Your standards and the way that the rules are written say we can do one. We'll also be able to point back to the beginning of Major League Soccer and a lot of other things that have happened over the last 30 years and say, you gave a lot of waivers before. Maybe you should be giving those waivers to us. Now, we will do our best to reach the PLS. I mean, that's indicated by how many teams have said we're building. Oh, wait, we're building and we're going to 15, right? Detroit, you mentioned a couple of them when we reviewed these teams. Like they were like, oh, 12, that sounds great. There's a first division. You're saying there's a 15. We're doing 15. Like that's indicative of USL having conversations behind the scenes with its member clubs that want to be first division that are basically like, hey, do everything you can to meet the standards so we don't have to ask for waivers. In a perfect world, we have no waivers, but that's not going to happen, especially in year one. So you are then saying, hey, we are playing a Division One season with some teams that are going to need waivers, but we're going to do our best to get our house in order. So please give us, and again, not that we will sue you, but obviously that idea of a lawsuit is out there because U.S. Soccer does not have the power to restrain U.S. Soccer, or USL rather, from having a first division league. There's nothing in the rules that say there can't be a second first division league. They've already tested the waters with the women. They've already got a first division women's soccer league operating in America. Now, you and I know, and most people know, that it's nowhere near the level of NWSL in terms of quality or attendance or its position in the marketplace. But they're operating one that is first division. So why wouldn't USL be able to do the same thing on the men's side?
Yeah, some conversation swirling in the chat here, which I agree with. That might lead to questioning how much is USL engaging with the federation for these waivers, because we're speculating a lot of them would need a waiver to fulfill that first division requirements. But if the likes of Louisville and Detroit are restructuring or reimagining their buildings that they had already, set in stone, and they're rearranging to expand to that 15K mark, also is that counterintuitive that maybe they are going to have to be by the letter of the standards as they are now.
Okay, so George is saying this tells him that USL isn't working too hard to modify PLS. I don't know if that's necessary. I don't know that I think that's necessarily true. What I think you do is you engage with US Soccer and you say, hey, we don't think these are the right standards. Let's have a conversation. Now, where MLS is in that conversation, I don't know. Where again, this is the U.S. Soccer Board and people that are stakeholders in U.S. Soccer who have some say in what the PLS looks like. Major League Soccer is one of those things. USL is one of those things. Some of those other, other groups are part of that as well. And they'll have there's a committee for this kind of thing at U.S. Soccer. But I don't know that I think that USL isn't trying. They just know we might as well do everything we can to avoid that conflict if possible. And of course, it makes the league look better if in the end they've got a bunch of stadiums that are 15,000 that were supposed to be smaller or that are being expanded. Because what does that indicate, right? This is kind of you get the momentum of everybody's investing in our league. Look at how much growth we've got, not just in terms of TV ratings or broadcast revenue or even attendance in some places, but people are investing their money, or cities are investing their money, or giving us deals to help us build stadiums that meet the PLS standard for first division.
I can't really argue with that. Like I said, we're almost a year after the announcement, and I'm hoping that part of this process and this weight that we're at right now is behind the scenes of them engaging in this. Obviously, I'm sure the application process takes some time for review and doing the due diligence on what the plans are and those expansions and the groups affiliated with the applications to become a first division team. But I really do hope that this delay in part is, there's going to be an overhaul, or at least some sort of an understanding of what requirements might have some leeway as USL and American soccer attempt to step into a whole new era with the advent of a first division and pro route.
One more comment that I think is worth pointing out. Wes saying, I think it'd be kind of unique if they had to do proposals like when you're bidding for the World Cup or Olympics. If you don't meet the criteria, how will you get there or make up for it? 100% that's going to happen. 100% that is what's going down. When you're asking for waivers, that's essentially what you're saying is, yes, we understand we need a waiver here, but we are going to work on that, right? And NASL got waivers from U.S. Soccer for those very kind of things. MLS got waivers with U.S. Soccer for those very kind of things. I do think, though, it's interesting, when we talk about PLS, forget the USL trying to launch a first division league as impetus for changing them. Just in general, I don't believe there's been an update to the PLS since 2016. I believe those standards that are currently in place are the same ones that were handed down in 2016. That is a long time ago by the standards of American soccer and the growth of American soccer, right? And again, maybe if you're U.S. Soccer, you're thinking, well, we got a first division. It's growing. It already meets all the standards. We don't have to worry about this. But you have second and third division in there as well. Like updating those things or taking a hard look at them feels necessary no matter what USL plans, no matter what's going on with Major League Soccer. It feels like something that should be happening. And I hope it is. We haven't heard anything. We know they're working on college soccer, Rob.
Yep.
We know that they've got a committee and a plan for that. Obviously, they're always engaged in things behind the scenes we don't see publicly, but I would hope that that's a conversation that's happening at U.S. Soccer.
Yeah, fingers crossed for more news to come out about USL Division 1 and which teams will participate. We will follow that story as it reveals itself. Thank you to all the comments on screen. We've had some great conversation today. An interesting connection. You were talking about the release of the PLS standards. One of the very first soccer podcasts I ever did was with our guest, Daniel Sperry, when those PLS requirements were first announced. So a little bit of a serendipity type moment there. And thank you to Daniel for joining us today. Some great on-location stuff regarding the sale of SKC and World Cup preparations. As that's going to be in the spotlight. SKC, or just Kansas City itself, will be in the spotlight this summer.
Yeah, I know we're way over time. It's been a really good conversation. But thank you to all the ultras. Thank you guys. Make this show work. Please tell people about us. so we can add to the ranks and get more of that conversation going. We did earlier in the show acknowledge Mr. Bob and his, his contributions to the show monetarily. He asked us for 10 seconds of silence to acknowledge the people that have been killed in Minnesota. I want to shout out my friend Wes Burdine, who runs Black Heart of St. Paul in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was on MS Now last week because not only is he a guy who is involved in soccer, one of the founders of Aurora FC, and a guy who runs a soccer bar, which is also a queer bar, as you can tell by the flag there. He is also very much involved in what's going on in the response, right? The organization, the community that is rallying together to push back against what's happening in Minnesota. So I just want to acknowledge Wes Burdine and everybody in Minnesota. Shout out to them. I'm very proud of my Minnesota soccer fans. I think as soon as we get done here, I'm going to go read a piece that Jeff Reuter wrote for the Guardian about being a Minnesotan and dealing with this and soccer and all of these things because the Guardian just hired him ahead of the World Cup in 2026. So anyway, this is all just extra stuff I thought it was important to acknowledge today.
Yeah, we're in pretty deep into the stream here today, but we should mark this as 2 weeks out until Morning Kick Around's marathon show, the Monday after the Super Bowl. We are going to be doing a long show in hopes of just, spreading our footprint here and doing something a little bit different as a springboard into 2026.
Yeah, I think, and I'll workshop this a little bit here on the air. I talked to Rob about this off the air. I think what we're probably going to do is we're going to do 3 hours. That's my goal for us. And if we end up going longer because people are excited and contributing and joining and all those things, we'll keep going with that. We'll try to have. I like the idea of an old school telethon. We'll try to have something that's marking how much we're bringing in and how many ultras we've added and things like that. But I want to kind of break it up. I want to be able to do an hour on the state of soccer growth, lower division soccer, dotting the map, all of those things. I'd like to do an hour on the World Cup, everything around it, right? Obviously the U.S. men's national team and what we're thinking about what's going to happen on the field, but clearly things like what Daniel talked about today with the Fan Fest and the teams going to Kansas City and the team and the cities that are already hosting games. There's some politics obviously in that and the idea of a boycott and all those things. And we'll pick out some topics and we're going to get some guests. I think Daniel might be a very good guest to bring back on the show. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, very excited about that. Thank you everyone for the support of the show already. And then let's get the word out there. We are going to put a graphic together to make it shareable, to spread awareness. We're going to get an array of guests. We're planning to get an array of guests, maybe throw in some games, maybe get to know our hosts. And like you said, some blocks of some solid content related to all the pillars of the American soccer conversation. So thank you all. Thank you to Daniel once again. Thank you to Bob. And then everybody, stay safe, stay warm, and enjoy your soccer.